So, Richard and Jonathan, I'm really glad to be with you and to have you with us and our audience. I'm excited to talk with you both about your work and your books. And there's a number that we'll get into today, but I'd like to start with Richard, since I've really known you and your work the longest. And I think I first got connected with your work when I read uh, this book. It's called Dream Hoarders, How the American Middle Class, Upper Middle Class, is Leaving Everyone Else in the Dust, why that is a problem and what to do about it. Um, and then I was very excited when I read your next book, which is Of Boys and Men, why the modern male is struggling, why it matters, and what to do about it. And, as you know, I've been working in the field of male gender medicine and healing for 50 years, so I'm very interested in the whole field. So maybe starting with Richard, if you could talk a little bit about your work generally and how particularly the book on boys and men ties in both with your earlier work and then some of the things we'll get into with where you've gone since then.
Sure. Well, thank you for having us. And it's our first joint media event, is it not, Jonathan?
Yes.
All right. So that's
Yeah,
super
it is.
fun to promote this work. And so the through line for me here is I've always been interested in issues of inequality, barriers to flourishing, right? And if you see particular groups who in particular ways are struggling in different ways, then that's motivated my work. So the lack of upward mobility in the US, by comparison to my home country, the UK, I should say that as we record this, it's the 8th anniversary of my citizenship. So I'm a proud American. But I was really struck by the evidence that actually the US talks a good game on equality of opportunity, but doesn't actually play a very good game on it. That was the focus of that work. And then as I dug further in, it became clear that whilst there are many issues that we still have to work on behalf of women and girls, there are some areas where we probably have we definitely have to pay more attention to boys and men. That led to that work. And I guess the through line to here is that my own journey has been to move from seeing this as an intellectual problem and an area of intellectual interest to being an institutional one, which is one of the reasons I've set up the American Institute for Boys and Men, and we're doing that research, to honestly a cultural one and an identity one. I think a big part of the story here is that we just have not updated our conversations about gender roles, about the positions of men and women. We've become trapped in a little bit of an unhelpful culture war, frankly, around this issue, a bit zero sum, right? That paying attention to some of the issues of boys and men means taking away from women and girls, or vice versa, if you prefer. And within that work, the area that we're going to talk about now, and I've become very concerned about, is the cratering share of men in these heal professions in health education and this for the purposes of this book, and thanks to Jonathan's persuasiveness, the arts, and then those areas that require more literacy skills, perhaps, than math. And so if you think of it as the antonym to STEM, I'm very proud that my middle son is now a public school teacher, teaching 5th grade in Baltimore City. He's one of very, very few men in that setting. And if we look at the mental health professions, and Jed, you know this very well, massive decline in the share of men in those professions. And so we've made good progress in really communicating to girls and young women that they can and should pursue careers in STEM, in areas that are traditionally seen as male, like law and medicine and even politics. And we have further to go, for sure. But there's been huge progress and a real massive shift in the conversation now, so that middle school girls now are so much more likely to see science or tech or as for them than even just 20, 30 years ago. We have not made the same progress in breaking down the gender stereotypes around those other roles. And in fact, we seem to have gone backwards. And so when there was the chance to have more of a cultural conversation and work with Jonathan on some work that is explicitly targeted at young men and boys to try and get them to see some of these roles as entirely appropriate for them. As Gloria Steinem said, we've spent a lot of time saying women can do anything that men can do. We now need to start saying that men can also do anything that women can do. And I think that's the spirit in which we engaged in this work. And I was just thrilled to be able to have the chance to work with Jonathan on this.
Oh, that's great. Well, beyond my professional work that I've been doing over the last 50 years, it's also personal as it is for all of us.
Yeah.
I have my wife and I have 5 children and 17 grandchildren and 3 and 1 more on the way, great grandchildren. So there's a number of boys and girls, and so
And
I
there's no fertility crisis in your family, Jed. That's for sure. What
well,
fertility crisis is what you're saying?
Indeed,
Yeah.
indeed. Well, what once we decided, I mean, personally, my wife and I decided when we were in college to have one child and then adopt a child because we didn't want to bring more children into the world. But once you do your own, then by the time it gets into future generations and so on, so I'm very excited both personally and professionally with the work that you're doing, and I want to get into more the collaboration. But I'd like you mentioned Richard the institute that you somewhat recently founded, the American Institute for Boys and Men. I wonder if you could just kind of give a quick update on where you are at the institute and where things are going for you, because I think that dialogue and that research focus, that institutional look at these issues is really unique and something that I think is long needed and now exciting that it's here.
Thank you. Yeah, well, as the entrepreneurs always warn you, just because there's a gap in the market doesn't mean there's a market in the gap. There's clearly a gap in the market for a boys and men focused think tank and research organization. That one did not exist before we were founded a few months ago. But it does turn out there's also a market in the gap in the sense that there is appetite for just the best quality research we can find, just describing the trends in a very non-zero sum way, and then working with scholars who are actually trying to do something about it, and hosting a platform where we can have a solutions focused, data-based conversation about this. I mean, a big part of my philosophy is that too much of the discussion about boys and men has been very, very frothy. It's been very much in the what is masculinity, toxic, non-toxic, what is it, and what is a man anyway? Fascinating discussions for sure. But in the meantime, I'm just much more interested in improving high school graduation rates for boys, especially black boys and boys from working class backgrounds. I'm much more interested in reducing male suicide rates. 40,000 men a year is obviously a huge number of men to be losing every year. And so I'm just much more focused on that practical side of it. And so far, I would say so good in the sense that I think enough people agree that there is work to be done there. Melinda French Gates gave a boost to our work by tapping me to be one of the people to receive $20 million to spend on this area of work. And the reason she did that was of course most of her money has gone to women's groups because that's her correct focus. But as she said publicly, look, it's not great for women and girls either if boys and men struggle. And to be clear, that's her motivation for supporting the work, rather than my motivation for doing the work. But it does nonetheless show you that I think the conversation's moved on, and that people are now willing to just say, yeah, look, there are lots of issues for boys and men. We can deal with those as well as the ones of women and girls. One of my constantly repeated lines is that we can think two thoughts at once. This is not a zero-sum game. And anybody that frames this as a zero-sum game, anybody who says, yeah, we can worry about boys and men by putting down women and girls or turning back the clock, not our friend. But equally, anybody who says, oh, no, you can't talk about boys and men because that means we can't care about women and girls anymore, also not our friend. It's like saying to the parent of a son and daughter that they're only allowed to care about one of them. And that zero-sum frame around gender has gotten us into a really difficult situation, I think, in our culture and maybe in our politics now too. And that's one of the ways in our straightforward, researchy way that we're trying to contribute to that.
So true. And in education, I work in all different areas, mostly in mental health, but also with the schools. And I had occasion to be working in a local school district where they had a program for girls to help them get more involved in some of the educational
Hmm,
opportunities. And as we
great.
talked to the girls at the end of this, I was asked to maybe do something for the boys. And the reasoning was from the girls. They said, if there's one thing you could do to help us, girls speaking now, is to do something with boys, because a lot of the problems that they were seeing had to do with a lot of things in their own lives, but also with boys. So, uh, talk to Jonathan for a moment. I'm just recently meeting Jonathan. We talked a little bit as we were waiting for you, but I know, Jonathan, what I read about you is that you're the 2023 National Elementary Art Teacher of the Year. And talk a little bit, if you will, about your background in education and what went into this, very interesting award that you got previously.
Yeah, I am in my 20th year of teaching public school elementary art education. So there's a lot of kids over 20 years. And in 2018, I was named the Ohio Teacher of the Year, and I was one of the 4 finalists for National Teacher of the Year, which brought a lot of opportunities and yeah, just really rich opportunities to focus on students' social and emotional well-being and emotions. And it helped kind of create a path for me to create an Emmy Award-winning drawing series that people can access online called Drawing with Mr. J. And it's all about prompting kids and adults, because both have been doing it, prompting them with really goofy drawing prompts that then turn into a conversation about our emotions, our experiences, and I, as an adult, sharing with these kids via the screen the ways that I have experienced grief, the way that I have experienced joy, the way that I
Mm.
cry when I'm disappointed. And I think it's really important that I, as a male elementary art teacher, am having these conversations with kids, both in my classroom, because that's a very real part of my curriculum that I created for my students, but then also with kids across the country via the screen. So yeah, that my focus is, yes, arts education. But then my vehicle to get to helping kids learn about the world and about themselves is based in emotions and experiences.
That's so good. When I listen to you, I think about my own kids and the broad range of things. My son, grew up with the arts. He's now in the tech world, but also as an actor and in the arts. So it's very, very close to my heart. And so I was really excited when I got your new book, and I just
Mhm.
want to get into that a bit with both of you, called Yes, Boys Can: Inspiring Stories of Men Who Changed the World, and He Can Heal. So I'd like to start with you, Jonathan, and talk about how the book came to be with you, and how
Mhm.
this came to be, and then how you connected with Richard. And then I'll ask Richard a couple of questions about the book and him.
Yeah, throughout this whole process, it's been a joy. It's been an adventure though as well, because this is my first book that I've been a part of. I did just 2 days ago, as times of this interview, I defended my dissertation, my PhD dissertation. So that's a whole other story. Again,
Congratulations.
focusing, thank you,
Yeah.
focusing on arts and social emotional
Yes.
learning. So here we are, it's all tied together. But in the midst of all of that, this opportunity came through an email about like, hey, we're interested in working with you on this project. And they outlined the fact that it was about talking about inspiring men who are in these fields where men are underrepresented, or where we need to highlight men who are in these roles. And I got excited because at the time I had my son was 6 years old. Now he's a little bit older, but we were driving in the car and he said, "Dad, we always read books about how women change the world. Did any men change the world?" Right? I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, what a loaded question that could go so many different ways. And so I was like, in the moment, I was like, yeah, sure, bud. Yeah, right. Because in your mind, all of a sudden you're thinking, oh, yeah, in the positive ways. Oh, in the really terrible ways. Oh, in the ways that have caused issues, the ways that like I want to highlight. And so what I'm excited about is now we have this resource, we have this book that we can share with, yes, our own children or your great grandchildren, Jed, but then
Yeah.
also with people that are grown adults that like always needed to see someone who was inspiring and empathetic and creative in these roles. I shared it with my mother-in-law, who was a career nurse, and it prompted a really great conversation about her role as a nurse, the doctors she worked with, the nurses she had a chance to work with. So yeah, it's really exciting. And then to bring together the names of 50 men who are in these fields of health, education, the arts, and literacy, and to investigate them and to talk with many of them, those who are still alive and with us. And then for them to begin to share that with their broader communities. It's all about starting conversations, which is really beautiful. And I think that's what's great, not to hog the video right now, but that's what's been really great is that then there have been people in my life that have said, oh yeah, did you include, and they'll say the name of someone, and we're like, well, no, Richard and I did not include that person. I didn't even know. I didn't even think. And they're like, oh, well, you should have included them. And I was like, wow, this is a great conversation because now we're expanding. Yeah, there are way more than 50 men who are inspiring and have changed the world positively. But like now this is part of a bigger conversation, highlighting those people in our personal lives, as well as well-known famous men that have done really remarkable work in the fields that we've mentioned.
Oh, that's you know, I know people watching this are going to feel what I feel is just the excitement of this dialogue that's beginning. And so I want to, turn it over to Richard and to talk. I of course had heard about your focus on heal, which obviously I have a very strong interest in, both personally and professionally. Um, and I think it was in your book of Boys and Men, you had a chapter titled Men Can Heal, HEAL, Getting Men into the Jobs of the Future. So if you could talk a little bit about that notion of getting men into the jobs of the future, and then more specifically, how you have come to see that HEAL as it applies to this particular book and this focus, because God knows we need to get more men, and I'm one of them, into this field of heal in the broad ways that you described it. So talk a little more about that broad base of what heal is and what the jobs of the future are in your mind.
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say for me, it's not my first book, but it's my first book of this kind for sure. And I want to give Jonathan the credit for really doing the bulk of the work in terms of finding ways to illustrate and bring to life kind of many of these figures. It's really been a real joy to work with you. Dr. Jonathan.
I mean, we've got like 6 more baby steps, so we're so close.
I shouldn't jinx it, right?
No, you definitely don't want to. Having
But
been
anyway.
at this stage where
No,
Jonathan
you're
is,
right. You can edit that out, Jed. No, but so there's a couple of things. One is that, and I think it's important to give a shout out here to an editor at Quarto, Jonathan Simkowski, who actually he realized that they were putting out a book aimed at middle and early high school girls called She Can STEM, with 50 stories of inspiring women in STEM professions. And the idea was to get girls and young women thinking early about those areas and to be inspired by them. And he had the idea. So, well, hold on, why don't we do something equivalent for boys on the other side of it? And then he was the one that recruited us to work together on this. And so, and that I think that took a bit of persuasion within the press to do that. And it's a beautiful compliment. And I really want to give a shout out to the She Can STEM book. I think it's a beautiful book, and does a wonderful job. And actually, I only have sons, but like if I had a daughter, I'd be thrusting that book into her hands at the right age for sure. But I hope that people will do the same with our book for their sons. And for me, there's 2 things here. One is just the data on the declining share of men in these professions, in these caring professions generally. Nursing, it's gone up a little bit. Like in mental health, the share of psychologists who are male is now 20%. and that was 70% in the 70s. The share of social workers who are male is 18%, and that's dropped from 38%. And so we've more than halved the share of men in psychology and social work. The share of teachers has gone down by 10% from 33% to 23%. So people like Jonathan and my son are increasingly rare in the K-12 education. And that's if you think representation matters, which I do, that matters. And then the final point here is that if you ask boys and girls in middle and high school about their career expectations, if you ask them about the things they're interested in, what you discover is these professions are generally not on the literally on the minds of boys. They don't consider them till later. A high share of teachers who are male are career switchers. Same with social workers, etc. And so the pipeline problem is that your average middle or high school boy doesn't see these careers in the caring professions, in education, as for them, which of course becomes a self-fulfilling cycle, right? If they only see male teachers and if they only see female teachers and female therapists, they will naturally come to the conclusion that those are jobs for women, right? And just the same way that if girls only see men on their television screens as politicians or in the labs as scientists, they will come to the conclusion those are jobs for men only. So breaking that stereotype has to happen early. And so if it's a cultural intervention and it has to happen early, then something like this, something like an inspiring book that's deliberately written and illustrated in a way as to be appealing to boys and young men of a certain age, to try and break down that gender stereotype. And as you said, just to provoke a conversation, get parents talking about it, get, maybe someone in a school will say, oh, well, have you thought about, you really like helping people. Have you thought about being a social worker? Or I've noticed how great you are with the younger kids. Have you thought about being a teacher? Or I've noticed that you're very artistic. Have you thought about, maybe teaching art or being an artist? If it prompts those conversations that would otherwise not happen, then I think that could be a huge contribution, because it's easy to talk about public policies, and that's my happy place in terms of my comfort zone, is to talk about policy. But the truth is, of course, it's usually about culture. If you think about the success of the women's movement, yes, there were policy changes. We had sex discrimination laws, we've had scholarships for women in STEM, we've had etc. But really, it was a change in culture. It was a moving away from the idea that women were suited for certain jobs and not others, or that certain roles are appropriate for them and not others. And so if we want a similar shift in the way we think about our boys and their futures, that's also a cultural intervention too. So that's, as I said, maybe it's uncomfortable for both of us, Jonathan. I don't know, but this is like a new space for both of us in a different way, right? I'm coming at it as a kind of nervous social scientist, and you're coming at it as a superbly successful art teacher and teacher who's now in the publishing. Now you're an author and a publisher, and you're a published author now, right?
Well, Jed, can I add to what Richard shared? Is
Please.
that many of the men that are featured in our book, yes, are career changers. Or they started there are several that started in military and then ended up in education or in the social sciences, or so they were career changers. There's also several men in the book that are feeling challenged by I'm thinking about being an educator, but also what if I did this thing? And it is almost always them sharing that there was a person in their life, an educator in their life, who is typically a male educator in their life, that they saw and they wanted to be like. So that is a theme that runs throughout this. And so that if we can create more conversations around well, look, here are also men in these roles for our youngest children, but then also for adults that are feeling oh, I should have followed that dream of being a teacher when I was younger. There's still time. And for specifically, I'm going to call out one guy in particular, Preston Dyer, who's in this book. He is a social worker, done amazing things. But at the beginning, he as a child only saw the pastor in his community as someone who was caring for and helping other people. So he thought, oh, that's it. I have to become a pastor. Even though he didn't want to write sermons, he didn't want to be in charge of a church. He wanted to be in the business of caring for people. It took until he was in university for someone there to say, have you considered social work? So that's what we
Mm.
need to do, is have more conversations, and for kids to see, kids, boys and girls, to see opportunities out there for them to engage in. So
Yeah, in a way, the book sort of tries to prompt a conversation that might otherwise happen just accidentally or through, serendipity. And it's just to bring it into the conversation, something that you don't want to leave to chance. And so, like, I'll mention another one. We're on a roll now. The danger is that this is all you'll get, Jed. But one of my favorites in there is Cliff Morrison,
mhm.
who's a nurse, but he started as a custodian. He was cleaning, mopping the floors in his hospital. He started that as a teenager and did that through high school, carried on doing that. And then he's like, actually, so he's in the hospital, like doing that manual job, and then he sees nurses and he sees what they're doing. He says, "Oh, maybe I can do that." Ends up doing that, and then is a nurse when the AIDS epidemic breaks out in San Francisco, and was at the front line of that. And he was one of the first people to say, "Look, I don't think there's any evidence that we're at risk here." People wearing spacesuit stuff and putting these
Mhm.
people in, just understand. He's like, I just don't see the risk, and I am gonna go and just be with my patients, right? And eventually, of course, we realized he was right, and it was perfectly safe to touch and be around those patients. But he was like, there was a lot of risk aversion, but he went through that risk aversion. So he's a hero, I think. But the point is that I don't know how he got his job at the age of 12 as a custodian in a hospital, but it's like, if he hadn't, let's say he'd got a job as a construction worker or working in a fast food restaurant or something like that, the chances of him ending up as this incredibly inspiring nurse would have been very, very low, I think. And so, like, if you can't see it, you can't be it. That's the mantra of the women's movement, but it applies just as much to these boys and men as well. And so in this book, what we're trying to do is to say, look, see them, right? For the many boys who are not going to see it in their own lives or not have a conversation like that. So I warned you, we're off now. You don't need it.
Well,
Jed, you
that's
can go.
okay.
Jed, you can go. We'll just keep going now.
Well, I'll join, the dialogue, because I'm one of those guys. I'm a bit older than you guys, and it's a different generation in a way. But I grew up in an interesting family. My father was in the arts. He was an actor in New York, but he had the conditioning that most men do, that you have to be the breadwinner, you have to make money. And so trying to make a living in that era, he had, quote, a nervous breakdown and ended up being committed to a mental hospital. And I was raised by my mother. And my mother, of necessity, had to get into the world of business because she had to make a living, and she was very good at it. And so I grew up with a mother who was business oriented. And so I started in the business world because that's who I saw, get
Mm,
into the business world. But I had this memory of my father, and so I decided what I needed was to be a very successful businessman in an area where I could help my father. And at that time was go to medical school, because they're the ones that do the best in the business world, make a lot of money, and then do good work. So I started out in medical school at a time when it was all men. That was very few women
mm,
in medical school in 1965 when I went off to medical school. And yet what I found when I got to medical school, that it was too narrow a view of what I had understood about what people need, and particularly my father and other men like him, for help. So I left medicine very quickly and went into social work, and went to UC Berkeley, and at a time when there were almost no men in social work. It was pretty much a
mm,
female profession. And for me, it was the best decision of my life. It just kind of happened because the profession has served me well. Both it speaks to my heart. I've been able to help a lot of people, And I've been able to make a great living doing it, which is what a lot of people are concerned about. Well, yeah, the female quote professions, they're great. I might like to do it, but you can't make any money at it. And just a little vignette. I've, been working in the field more than 50 years now, so that helps. But I had a client, a woman who was seeing me and getting help, but she said, "Geez, you charge more than my psychiatrist." And I said, "Well, yeah, I do. Has your psychiatrist helped you?" And said, "Well, no, not really. That's why I came to see you." So, the good news, among many other things, from my experience, is that not only is the healed professions speaks to many of us who really have a heart and a desire for this world of work, in my case, in the areas of male mental health and that whole field, but it is truly an up and coming profession. I now train people who want to work in this profession because now is the time. There is more and more work. So I just want to underline
Mm.
that and to say of what you are seeing, that it is a time to get into the profession because, as you point out, in psychology and social work, which are the areas I work mostly in, the numbers are down now like they were when I started. So this is a good time to get in. It's a good time because the need is there, the heart is there, and now you all are giving the public recognition for the value of this. So that's my two
Mm.
cents. I want to get back to the two of you, because one of the things that I'd like you to speak to currently is again, back to the book. I'll just hold the book up again because just so people can see it. Um, and it doesn't say this on the cover, but inside it talks about the focus of the audience, 8 to 12-year-olds. Am I right? Did I get 8 to 12-year-old boys? So clearly it's going to be some time before those boys, and I've got, like I say, grandchildren and great grandchildren of these younger ages, that I want to be able to have a good life and be able to get in those professions. But we know we're living in a world right now when we get into, you talked about the elections, being a US citizen now, the US elections are coming up soon. And I think there's a real question about the conflicts going on in the US and the world, what kind of leaders we're going to have. And I wonder if you could each speak to the hope that you have, because clearly you're looking ahead to the future for 8 to 12-year-olds. Hopefully, by the time 10 years hence, we'll be in a good world for those young kids and future generations. What do you see right now in terms of your concerns for our immediate future and what needs to be done? And maybe as you look ahead towards, what do you want for your children and the young kids that will be in the world of work 10 years from now? What can we do now to help them? So either one, just jump in, whoever,
Mm.
Jonathan or Richard, want to jump into that.
Well, I'll do the sort of policy wonky bit maybe first, which is that um, one of the reasons that it's harder to get men and boys to consider some of these professions is because they have the idea that they just won't make enough money. And one of the reasons they have that idea is because those professions aren't paid well enough. So they're not wrong, right? So now it's getting better. I mean, last year, K-12 teachers had, 4% real increase. You're seeing states trying to do it, just hit 70,000 a year average now for K-12 teachers. It's still not like huge money given the educational requirements for it, but you are seeing real movement now to kind of say, we've got to do better. And in some ways, I think there's a real connection between the valuation of these professions and the role of men in them, but not in the way that perhaps people normally think about this. What people will sometimes say is these jobs are less well paid because they're female dominated. So maybe if we get more men in, finally they'll get better paid. That's an unattractive argument, as you can imagine, especially to a lot of women. right, in those professions. I'd say, really? You're kidding me. The only way we can get paid fairly is to let some men in, right? I actually think the conversation isn't that. I think the conversation is that for too long, these professions have to some extent been able to free ride on the labor of women for whom they have not paid enough money. And that era is coming to an end. And that increasingly women are saying, well, I could be a teacher or a nurse or a social worker, or I could be a lawyer or a management consultant or whatever. And so what's happening, I think, is that an era where we're in a way we could sort of get away with paying these professions less because women had fewer alternative choices, especially in education. We got more than we should have done. We've had a bargain in many ways off the backs of women's labor. That is coming to an end. And so we have to pay these professions more anyway. One result of that will be to help us to attract more boys and men. But it's that way round. It's that it's time to pay these professions better anyway, and that for too long we've undervalued them. And I think it is that reason. It's because women's the restrictions and their other choices led them to be in these professions where they had less power. That world is disappearing before our eyes. And so if you think you can get teachers and psychologists and social workers on the cheap 10, 20 years from now, you're kidding yourself. So it's time to pay them properly anyway, and it will have the byproduct of getting more boys and men in. The other thing I'll just say is like my son, I mentioned my son's just gone into teaching, and I'm like, okay, all he knows is his starting salary, which is pretty good actually. He's teaching in Maryland, but I'm like, okay, but what will it be 10 years? What will it be 20 years? What are the promotion opportunities? What's the retirement benefit like? What's the health benefit like? And I'm looking at all this, I'm thinking, this is a good job. And Jonathan, this is like, you can speak to this, but I'm like, okay, you're not going to make $1 million, but you're going to make good money in a pretty secure profession with good benefits. And guess what? You love it and it's socially valuable. That's like the game. Like you just won at life. But what we can't do is expect people to do this on poverty wages. We of course we can accept the fact that a good teacher, like Jonathan's series is amazing, by the way. I think that the drawing thing, it's like, I'm one of those people that told I'm not a drawing person, and my boys have inherited that, and I'm very ashamed of that, except one of them, right? Because I'm like, it's a bit like saying to a girl, oh, you're not a math person. And so I've been doing some of the things, some of your little doodles and stuff, and it's very interesting because on the one hand, I'm like, I suck at this, but on the other hand, I'm like, it's so liberating to do it. So I just want to give a shout out to you because I just think that it's so important. And the fact, I do think it helps that it's a guy doing it as well, because it just, of course, it shouldn't only be guys, but it kind of takes a little bit the stigma away from it, which is that drawing's a girly thing, which honestly, I've had a little bit of that as well. And so I do think that these jobs are much better than perhaps people think they are, and they need to get better still in terms of the pay.
And I think to add in my like school-based, children-based perspective is that when you look at this book, there is no conversation about money. There is no conversation about like salaries but each of the men have these meaningful existences that they are doing this work because it means something to them. And one of the teachers, Jamar Roundtree, was like going into correctional work. And he was like, but I've always felt called to being a teacher. And he's like, and I'm good at it and I should be doing that. And so it's like that wrestling with, so that as students and their families are reading through this book, like, sure, they can have conversations about finances and the future, but also about, do you want to love what you're doing? And I'm happy to say that I love what I do every day. Sure, there are hard days, but I love what I do. And some other like quick hits from the book is that Candido Crespo is an artist and art educator who's in the book. And he shares that in middle school, he was kept getting asked, as all of our kids do, what do you want to be when you grow up? Starting when they're like preschool, right? Like they're asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be? And he said that as a middle schooler, he had this realization that he's like, I'm just in middle school. Everybody step back. Like, I'm allowed to live my life as a middle schooler and figure this out as I go. And I think that that's what's really great about this conversation is like, you don't have to know as a 12-year-old what you want to do for the rest of your life. But if you're never shown possibilities, then you won't dream possibilities. So yes, as we have little kids in kindergarten dressing up with what they want to be when they grow up, they should be able to see that there are men and women and all of us in these roles and those possibilities. And the other one to thinking about the future is Kurt Russell, who is a National Teacher of the Year, a dear friend of mine, actually. He was quoted in an interview saying, when someone asked him about public education, his response was, "I still have hope." And it's his hope for educators, it's his hope for children, it's his hope for our country and the world. And I still have hope. And each one of these bios comes with an activity. It's a go give it a try activity where it's based off of the bio. And sometimes they're like physical doing things. Sometimes it's like talking to someone in your life or writing notes, researching on the internet. And the one that goes with Kurt Russell is prompting the kids reading this to go make a poster for themselves that says, "I still have hope." And for them to include on it, what are they hopeful about? Are they hopeful about their future? Are they hopeful about their future career? Are they hopeful about that dog they really want, right? Because let's also think about an 8 to 12-year-old and what they're really hopeful for. So, so there's so many ways that I hope that this book and the conversations around it spark hope for people as well.
Yeah, and also on the age thing, it's true that that's what, that seems to be the sweet spot for this kind of book. But I also, look, these are averages. I could and this book will be kicking around the house. And like, I really do want to emphasize that you could easily be well into high school and pick up this book and see it and so on too. The point is that it's a conversation starter, as Jonathan said, within schools, within classrooms, in homes, in families, in libraries. Right? We'd just love it to, or I can imagine anyone picking it up. Right? I could imagine the 18-year-old who's got serious senioritis as he grinds his way through another year of high school, still not sure what to do, and then someone brings, maybe his younger sibling brings this home from school or kind of has it, and it's like, oh, he looks at this, right, and looks at some stuff, and it was really fun choosing some of these, like, and you can see that some of our own idiosyncrasies will come through. And so like one of them, which is fun, which I'll just mention too, is Sir Jonathan Elliot Ashbridge. Right now, I'm from the UK originally, so it's part of why I put him in there. But the reason I wanted to put him in there because he wanted to be a nurse. He'd done it as a volunteer. His parents were adamantly against it. It comes from a working class part of Wales. It was just not, wasn't seen as something to do. He's 10 years older than me. He was born in 59, right? So he, this you can imagine it was tough from the working class neighborhoods of Wales to go and do that. But he did it and ended up running the Council for Nursing and Midwifery in the UK. And then he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth. So he's now a knight. And so we call him the knight. I think we could say something like the knighted nurse or the night nurse. Now, the part of the reason for doing that is because we are intentionally, as does the She Can STEM book, to kind of lean against some of these ideas that these are not appropriate jobs for men and to excite boys a little bit about them. And the whole idea of a knight, right, to a young boy, I mean, that's interesting and exciting, right? And so I wanted to be an astronaut, followed by a librarian, followed by, I don't know what it was, but like, you can be a nurse and you can be a knight, right? Just cool. It's not that most nurses are going to be knights, even in the UK. That's not the point. The point is simply to try and break down and play with and inspire these different stories. And they've come in through different ways. There's a very, very diverse group. For sure, of men doing it. The kind of points, they've got these different pathways in, these different stories, these different barriers they've overcome. Some of them actually had to kind of take legal action to be allowed in to nursing schools, for example, right? And so the variety, the diversity of the men featured here is not just in that racial, ethnic, religious, national background. Of course, that's there, but much more so, I think, is just in the way they ended up doing this. Right? I mean, it's just so incredible. These beautiful stories about how they ended up doing it. And so And again, I think, Jonathan, I want to give you a lot of credit for really helping to bring these to life as well, in every way, because you want these stories to sing. And then, as you say, we have these lovely prompt questions, which are just designed. I can imagine this being a classroom activity. I mentioned my son's fifth grade teacher. I'm sending a bunch to him. I'm hoping there'll be some there. And so you can easily think, anyone's listening to this, like, buy a load, and just like, or just get them into libraries and stuff, and just form discussion groups around them. That's really what this is about. So when I don't mean buy a load, borrow a load from a library. Now our publisher will be in trouble. Can you edit that bit out where I just said don't buy it? I mean buy it.
Well,
Well,
I think another thing that you are exemplars yourselves of the joy, the excitement, and I would add another group to the buy is that this I enjoyed reading the book myself, just for me,
Right.
before I give it to my grandkids and my great
Yeah.
grandkids. It's just very interesting. There are things I didn't know. There are things that everybody is interested in interesting stories and interesting people. And I think as they watch our little dialogue today, they can't help but feel the infectious, excitement of Jonathan and Richard as you just share your enthusiasm, and it shows up in the book, that makes the book an alive dialogue that everybody wants to be a part of and share with others. So we can certainly continue, and anything else you two want to add in, let's do that. But I want to be sure people hear and get how they can be in touch with you. I know it's, your names are there, but for people that want the easiest, the most direct way people can learn about the book, they can be in touch with you, because the book really is an entree into some pretty cool people. And you two are the face of a whole bunch of other people that they're going to want to get to know. So let's start with how they can get more connected with both of you.
Jonathan, you go first.
Okay, yeah. Yes, thank you. And I have to say really quickly, because we're talking about the life that this book has and the energy. Chris King is the illustrator of this book, and he is remarkable. The way that he brought these individual men to life using the research that we did and we provided for him, they're extraordinary. And I was so grateful that he agreed to work on this project. And just as you look at it, like, we have to give credit to him for really bringing the whole book, the energy that it has, and the professionalism. I could go on for days because, as an artist and art educator,
as an art guy, this is the highest praise he could get, right?
Oh, every time we'd get a proof of one, I'd be like, oh, I love it. Or like, I had no idea things. It's just amazing. But yes, you can connect with us clearly by purchasing, sharing, using this book. It's available October 22nd, wherever books are sold, and will be out in the world. And for people to enjoy it and share with a friend or a student, people in your life. And then, of course, you can always check out Drawing with Mr. J. You can just search that online and that'll pop up. As well as my social medias are at Juravich. And so I can connect there as well.
Super. And Richard, how can people connect with you and the book and your other books?
Yeah, so the book, as Jonathan says, it's called Yes, Boys Can. That's the main title, and then it's Inspiring Stories of Men Who Change the World. There it is. He Can Heal. It's available for pre-order right now. I don't. When's this going to drop, Jed? When are people hearing this?
It'll roll out over time, but right now and on, people will be able to get it.
So it's out. It's for the purpose of this. It's out now. I think it would be
exactly.
And so that's. And then in terms of my social media handles are just Richard V Reeves. There's a V in the middle. And then the American Institute for Boys and Men, where you can find some of the statistics that I've mentioned, is just aibm.org. That's the best place to keep in touch with our work.
Super. So is there anything else either of you would like to say? I mean, we could continue. You know, it's just great hanging out and talking and telling stories and sharing, you know, about our lives, our children, grandchildren, and, you know, the future
Well,
of men and boys in our
yeah, I'll
world.
say something and
Yeah,
then give Jonathan the last word. I mean, just for me, the book is exciting. I think one of what you're feeling from us is excitement about the book and the stories that are in there. From me, anyway, you're also hearing some relief, frankly, about being able to talk positively about some stuff we can do and it's great, cool stuff that boys can do in these different areas. And so it's a very positive. And I spent Burke in a very positive conversation. I spent a lot of my time, I think, correctly drawing attention to many of the problems that we see. And I think that's necessary. But this is also, especially, I think, especially in this moment, I think there's real hunger from people to hear not just tell me what else has gone wrong with the world today, but actually to hear what cool thing can I do to make the world better today. And that's the spirit I think that's in this book. It's one of the reasons I love it.
super.
And I would say that one of the things that the Quarto Publishing Company had me do after doing this, and as an educator, I was really excited, is to make a learning guide that accompanies it. With some discussion questions for educators to have, some assignments, some activities, other than the activities that are in the book. And one of those is for them to work with the librarian and their educator to research the men that are alive beyond what we've provided for them, to find ways to contact them and reach out to them and thank them for their work, to ask follow-up questions. And that's exciting because as we started about talk about conversation starters, this continues to live on and grow, and to partner 8-year-olds with these educators and with these policymakers. And it's just amazing to think about the possibilities there. So I do hope people will search that out through the Quarto website. And then the other thing is as far as conversations go, is that I have a son and a daughter. And yes, before this book, we spent a lot of our time reading, buying, sharing books about women who changed the world. And that was my eldest child is my daughter. And we'll continue to do that. And the conversation we had with her, and she is 11, and conversations about how now we have this book to show her empathetic, caring men other than her dad and the dads of her friends, right? There are people out there, and to have that conversation, and that exact same sentiment was shared with me by an intervention specialist I work with. She said she shared it with her world about the book because she said that her 2 daughters, like she wanted them to see positive male role models other than their father. And I think that that's really exciting because again, there's a purpose and an audience that has been determined for the book, but that audience continues to grow based off of how it's shared and why it's shared, which is really exciting. So, yeah.
Well, thank you both.
Amen.
This has been a just joyful and exciting and hopeful talk about your work, the future, and I know we'll stay in touch. I'd like to take advantage of more of the connection. So for now, we'll say goodbye to the this particular interview. We'll look forward to getting this out more into the world. Others can share it, and we'll look forward to staying in touch with everybody that will connect with you and us through this video and this podcast and the other materials we'll be sharing with the world. So thank you.